Right. Welcome everyone to the second episode of Fearless for Freedom. I'm Mariam. I'm a European Community Associate at Students for Liberty. I will be your host today. And as we will hear today, it is a conversation that is long overdue and also very interesting. Today we're going to be talking about Romania, and it's one of the most contentious election cycles in the recent history. As many of you know, May 4th and May 18th are the two rounds when Romania will pick a new president. But these are not just any elections, it is a rerun, so to speak, a second chance for the nation to vote a new president after the elections of November 2024 was annulled. And there were some claims of Russian meddling setting all of this off. That decision is, of course, unprecedented in Romania and has definitely divided the country and raised critical questions about foreign influence, about electoral integrity, and whether the democracy is still intact. And at the epicenter of all of this crisis is one of the candidates, Calin Georgescu, a ultranationalist candidate who gained a massive support last year, who has now been excluded for the new elections. And authorities argue that his run violated democratic norms and that external actors, particularly Russia, helped it gain popularity. And this disqualification led to the protests in Bucharest streets. This distrust and this resistance is growing stronger, and some of them see his removal as necessary to protect Romanian democracy, while other people claim that this signals a threat not just to the state, but also to the democracy itself. And we have to mention this: Romania is definitely not an isolated case. It is a political crisis that reflects a larger conflict across Europe. It is a struggle between democracy and authoritarian influence. It is a resurgence of nationalism, social media's impact on political narrative, and all of these are at stake in Romania, and not only in Romania today. What comes out of these elections could set a precedent, not just for Romania, but also throughout Central and Eastern Europe more broadly. And I have a lot of questions today. So what happens in Romania next? Who are the major candidates? What do they stand for? How has Russian influence impacted all of this? Is it really that substantial? To what extent has social media and disinformation polarized the electorate? And most of all, of course, can Romania actually recover its stability, and how deep the crisis actually goes? The answers to these questions likely lie with our guest today, Diana Nasulea. Diana, thank you so much for joining us today. Diana has a PhD in economics, has a background in international relations, and she's also a programs manager at IES-Europe, where she writes policy papers. Diana, thank you again for joining the discussion. Welcome. And I would first of all ask you to describe the bigger picture for us. What led to the crisis, to walk us through some key events that led to the annulment of Romania's presidential elections in 2024, and what were the main factors behind the Constitutional Court's decision?
Thank you for having me, first of all, and it's good to be here. And this is a very complex topic. You've summed it up pretty well, so that's kind of what's been happening. And it's something that we are struggling with here. I mean, we are all trying to understand how did we get to this point? Like, what has happened? So I'm going to try to give you a sort of an overview, and then maybe that's going to clarify some things, I hope. So okay, let's start with the beginning. What exactly happened, first of all? So we had these presidential elections in November, last November in 2024. In Romania, the presidential elections are quite a big deal. So unlike some parliamentary systems where the president is mostly a symbolic figure, where the president has a ceremonial role, in Romania, the political power is split between the president and the prime minister. The prime minister does most of the politics, but the president is key when it comes to foreign policy, national security, and appointing key figures in the government. So the president is the one that gives the direction of the policy. And he's also the one that tells our partners, international partners, where we stand, what are our policies, Are we open to foreign investments? Are we having a more pro-European stance on foreign policy, or are we leaning towards Russia? So important for us. And in November, we had a lot of candidates from all the political spectrum running for the president, and some of them were the favorites. And then we had these guys who were all polling in single digits, like 4, 3, 5%. By the end of that Sunday, when we all went to the polls, something very strange happened. We saw this candidate slowly rising in percentages. So starting from 4%, so he was at 4% in all the polls. He ended up the first with 22.9% in the first round of the presidential elections. You can imagine that the most looked up question on Google in the following days of the election was, who is Călin Georgescu? I had dozens of my friends asking themselves on social media during the next day, who is this guy? We've never heard of this guy. How is it possible that he came out on top when none of us and none of our friends heard about him? So something has happened. His campaign was almost entirely on TikTok and Telegram. He managed to reach voters through these very short, emotional videos, mostly anti the system. He presented himself as being this independent nationalist, someone who is not owned by anyone. He spoke about Romania losing its sovereignty, Romania that should not maybe be part of the West anymore. He even questioned the membership of Romania to NATO, which is a big thing, given the fact that we are bordering Ukraine and given the fact that we are a state that has NATO troops and American troops on its territory. He also praised the interwar period of Romania with elements from this political movement, which is called the Iron Guard. This is a movement that is associated with fascism, anti-Semitism, and had links with Nazi Germany. At the moment in Romania, it's illegal to promote such points of view and symbols that relate to that fascist movement. However, he did just that with no consequences whatsoever. So where do the votes come from? First of all, the diaspora vote. And this was a big change. Usually, in the past 30-something years, the diaspora, the Romanians who live outside Romania, would vote for very pro-European presidents. We had previous elections where the diaspora vote was exactly what made the difference between having, let's say, a more not necessarily pro-Russian, but not very pro-European president and a pro-European president. And we managed to get that pro-European president because of the diaspora. This time something happens. And the way many researchers and sociologists are trying to explain this is that these people are a bit frustrated with what happens in the countries that they're currently living in. The West that they've been emigrated to is not the West that they knew 20 years ago. Something has changed. I don't know. Maybe it's the immigration policies. Maybe it's something else. They're frustrated from a particular point of view, and they project these frustrations back to Romania. So they look at Romania and say, okay, we don't want Romania to become like this. So we need to vote for someone who's more nationalistic and who doesn't listen to all these policies that Brussels is imposing on the states. Then you had the rural voters in Romania. Those, especially those who are feeling left behind from a cultural point of view, but also from an economical point of view. Then you have the fact that at the moment in Romania, according to the last PISA results, 42% of the adult population is functionally illiterate. And that's what the data says. So these people, they can read, they can write, but they cannot understand things that are a bit more complex than that. And that's a big issue because these people are very vulnerable to disinformation, to propaganda, to very simple messages that actually have no substance. And also you have young people on TikTok. TikTok is very big in Romania. About 70% of the adults in Romania take their news from TikTok. And they were flooded with viral content that was promoting this candidate. So he turned out first. It was a shock for everybody. One of the members of the parliament asked for a recount of the votes. The recount happened. We saw that there were no major changes. There was no traditional election fraud. So on December 2, after the recount, the Constitutional Court of Romania validates the result of the election and says, okay, in a week, you're going to all go to the polls and vote between Călin Georgescu and Elena Lasconi, who is the president of the Save Romania Union Party, which is a center-right party. Of course, all the other parties said, we are going to support her. We don't necessarily like her. We don't necessarily like her policies, but we are all going to support her against this guy. But then things started to happen during these 4 days from this actually 6 days from the recount to the election. Just 4 days before the vote, the president of Romania declassifies this intelligence report coming from the Supreme National Committee for Defense of Romania, saying that Romania was a target of a hybrid attack, and this entails cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, foreign interference, and they were all designed to sway the result of the election. The details were a bit shocking. There were apparently around 85,000 cyber attacks during the election campaign, nearly 25,000 TikTok accounts that were all created to push forward content that was pro-Călin Georgescu, and about 1 million euros in funding, in advertising, political advertising for this candidate. And this is important because the candidate declared zero expenses on the political campaign. So, all the presidential candidates need to report how much money they spent on the campaign. And he was the only one to declare that he spent zero, which again started to raise some questions. After this report is declassified, we started getting messages, press releases from European leaders and from American leaders as well. So on December 4th, the Department of State of the United States issues this press release saying that they're concerned with the direction in which Romanian elections are going, that any changes in the foreign policy of Romania will probably lead to a reconsideration of the bilateral relation between the United States and Romania, and that if we decide to become more isolated, we might scare off American investors. So a pretty strong message coming from the United States. Then you have other European leaders saying, okay, we are concerned, there is definitely something happening. We also have information that there were these sort of hybrid attacks. So make sure that you analyze this and see what you do next. Then on Friday, the votes, the people in diaspora start going to the polls because we let the diaspora vote the entire weekend. And on that day, the Constitutional Court comes and says, okay, we have changed our minds. And we're actually going to cancel the elections because these reports that have been declassified showed that the process was not fair. Again, this was very shocking for everybody, not only for people who voted for Călin Georgescu, but for the entire electorate. Imagine in your countries, if you already go to vote, 50,000 people have already voted, and then the Supreme Court, who had previously said that the result is okay, now comes and says, okay, the result is not okay anymore, we're going to cancel it. It felt very serious, and many people got very frustrated with this. Călin Georgescu, of course, called it a coup. Elena Lasconi said it's a blow to democracy. People started protesting, sharing on social media all sorts of messages, saying that even if he is sort of backed by Russia, where is the proof that you cannot cancel elections without actual proof? But again, if we talk about protests, they weren't so big. I mean, we didn't see millions of people or going to the streets and asking for the elections to not be cancelled, for the two candidates to go for the second round. And as you said, the new election rounds were set for May 4 and May 18. Now, to explain how we got to this, we need to go even back a bit in the history of Romania, let's say so. So in the past 30 years, the political scene in Romania was mainly run by two political parties. The Social Democratic Party, which is a left-leaning party that is traditionally supported by the elderly population and the rural voters, because they tend to promise all sorts of things, more bigger pensions, more things, more free stuff for the electorate. And the National Liberal Party, who's a central-right party that is appealing more to urban voters. They are rivals. Traditionally, they were rivals. But after the COVID pandemic, they formed a coalition government. And this is what made a lot of people very frustrated and very upset, because the people who vote for these two parties, they're very different. They do not necessarily share the same values. So when these two parties came together in this grand coalition for ruling the country, people felt betrayed. Right? So they were saying, okay, it's about stability. We need a stable government. We had this crisis. We're just going to be together for a few months until we sort things out. But the coalition kept on going. And this is part of what caused this frustration with people who then went for an anti-system candidate. The second thing is related to sort of a special kind of nationalism that is in Romania. I've already mentioned this political movement from the 30s, who is now being in the clear. After communism fell, these people who used to be considered anti-communists, but they were anti-communists, but they were also fascists. Their image was somehow cleaned. They were seen as martyrs, and now you have a lot of people who are going back to these messages and saying, okay, these people were actually patriots who loved Romania, and we should go back to that thinking where we put Romania first. Then you have the problem with the 42% functionally illiterate adults in Romania. You also have the problem with rejection of what the European Union has been doing in the past years. Many people in Romania do not necessarily understand why foreign investments are good. They see these transnational corporations coming to Romania and investing money here. They see this as companies coming to steal the richness of our land. They come to steal our money. They don't pay enough taxes in here, so we should just get rid of all of them. So that's the mentality in Romania, and it's very hard to fight that without a proper educational system, because this is actually where it all leads to. Without a proper educational system and without people understanding the benefits that Romania has received from being part of the European Union and of NATO, we are now in a place where, although Romania has been growing economically in the past years, and it's probably in the best time of its history, people do not see this. So a lot of contradictions happening. And also this pro-Russian stance, which is also a contradiction, because by the latest polls that were done in Romania, about 87% of Romanians support NATO and the European Union. So having a candidate that is openly pro-Russian sounds very, very strange. Now, the way he phrases that pro-Russian stance is not straightforward. Although he said about Putin that he's a great statesman, that he's a patriot, he loves his country, and so on, what Călin Georgescu comes and says is, we should not be pro the European Union or pro Russia. Why do we have to choose? We can be in the middle. We can be the country that helps this situation end. Why do we need to be pro-war? We want peace here. We are neighboring Ukraine. We should wish for peace in our country, and this is why we should not antagonize Russia in any way. Maybe we should befriend Russia and play this role of a country that is, in between and that benefits from both sides. And for many Romanians, this somehow makes sense, because they see the war in Ukraine as something that has been going on for 3 years already. They see this propaganda happening on all social media saying, okay, that if the war doesn't end, all Romanian males were going to be sent to the front to fight in Ukraine for a country that's not even your country. This is happening. It's everywhere on Romanian social media, and people actually believe in this. So it's strange, okay? A country that supports NATO and the European Union, but somehow likes this guy who has a pro-Russian stance. And the last thing here is that it's more about protest than policy. So many analysts in Romania say that the far right in Romania, it's not a traditional far right. In the Western countries, far right is usually the one that fights against immigration, that gathers the fears of people against, the strangers, the people coming from outside. Romania doesn't have this. We do have some immigrants, but in a very, very small percentage. We are still a country that exports people outside the country. So many Romanians go abroad. The far right in Romania is different also because it doesn't really come with an alternative. So what all these far right parties are talking about is, we should not listen so much on Brussels. We should have our own say in NATO. But we should maybe also befriend Russia, but doesn't really say how are these things going to happen together, because it's unfortunately one or the other. You can't really have both of them. So it's a protest movement. It's not a far right that goes into offering an alternative, closing our borders and so on. No, it's just a protest movement. They're all saying what they don't like about what's happening, but they do not offer any alternatives. They just go on with this very simplistic messages that manage to become viral and that gather together all the anger and the frustrations of Romanians from Romania and from abroad. Good. Now, what's going to happen next? So we have these elections, and Călin Georgescu wanted to run again, obviously, for the elections. But when he went to file his candidacy with the Electoral Bureau on March 7, he was rejected. And he was rejected using the same decision that annulled the elections in November, and also a precedent that happened before the elections when another far-right candidate was barred from filing her candidacy. I'm talking about a politician named Diana Nasulea, who is also nationalistic, far right, has very clear ties with Russia. She often goes to the Russian embassies to have meetings in there. And she is also a big fan of these fascist symbols from Romania's history. And she was barred all because she does not respect the constitution, because the constitution of Romania says that you have to follow this transatlantic foreign policy that Romania had for the past 30 years, and everything that goes against these democratic values makes you unfit for becoming a president. So because she was barred, then they used this precedent to reject his file. Of course, he appealed. The case went to the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court upheld the ban. This is what triggered a bigger round of protests. But again, not so many people in these protests. I mean, personally, I would have expected more people to go on the streets. After all, he was voted by 2 million Romanians. So you would have expected more people to be frustrated with this decision. And somehow they weren't as frustrated. Okay, some of them went to the streets. They started fighting with the gendarmes. They um, launched some fires in there with some media cars and so on, but nothing much. I think the image of what happened at this protest is actually amplified in the international media because some Twitter posts that were made by significant figures in the new US administration, and they do not necessarily reflect what was happening in Romania and how people felt about it. So it wasn't such a big deal here. After he was barred, the far right had to decide where to go next. So who's going to be the next candidate? And the natural choice, in a way, was George Simion, who is the leader of the Alliance for the Union of Romanians, which is the biggest far-right party in Romania. So at the moment, the far-right parties in Romania hold about 35% of the seats in the parliament, which is, again, a big number. And they started from nothing 5 years ago, and they managed to get a lot of people to vote for them. So I think in 2019 was the first time they got a significant amount of votes to get to the parliament. And last year at the parliamentary elections, all the three parties, let's say so, together are now gathering 35%, which is big. And it's curious because they were in the parliament for the past 5 years, and there is not even one legislative proposal that was passed or that was proposed by this party. So they spent 5 years in the parliament, they did absolutely nothing, and somehow they gathered more votes this time. Interesting. So he's the candidate of the far right now. He's an interesting political figure. He's not as anti-NATO or anti-EU as Călin Georgescu, but he's a persona non grata in Ukraine and in Moldova. Yeah, so you can imagine that a lot of us don't really wish for a president who cannot enter Ukraine or Moldova because he's not allowed due to things that he had previously done in these countries. The other candidate is Crin Antonescu, who is supported by the two mainstream parties. Again, the Social Democrats and the National Liberals together, they're supporting the same candidate. He's a liberal. He's been in politics for many, many years, but he's not really a charismatic figure. So people don't really like him that much. Then we have Nicu Șordan, who is the mayor of Bucharest. He's a former mathematician. He's seen as an independent, a reformist, a technocrat. He's focused on practical governance, not necessarily ideology. And he's got an appeal to educated voters from urban areas, but unlikely to gather votes in the rural area of Romania. Then we have Elena Lasconi, who has been the candidate in the previous elections as well. She's the mayor of this, let's say, average in size city in Romania, but she doesn't really have a lot of support. So people were supporting her at the previous elections because there wasn't another option available. But now everybody says, okay, you should just not not go to run again, because we're just gonna split the votes through many candidates, and we're gonna have again a far right candidate coming up on top. We also have Victor Ponta, which is a former prime minister. He made this political comeback. In the poll, he scores pretty well, which again is surprising because he was involved in so many scandals, and there were so many protests a few years back because of him when he was prime minister. And that's about it. So these are the candidates. Now, who's going to come out on top? I'm not sure. I mean, after the previous elections, I don't even dare saying who's going to be first, because I was so wrong the last time. We all were. Somehow all the polls were wrong, and something completely different happened at the day of the elections. The stakes. What are the stakes here? Well, first of all, it's this foreign policy shift. If we have a president that pushes towards exiting NATO, or that pushes towards weakening this cooperation with the EU, that would be a massive shift, especially now when all European countries are trying to cooperate more and to discuss more ways in which Europe can defend itself and can speak in the international community as a single actor. Then there's the problem of the internal division. Because, of course, barring Călin Georgescu has made a lot of people very upset. And again, not only people who support him. They're, in a way, right to say that, okay, the system was afraid of this guy winning, and this is why they didn't let him run. So these people have their own frustrations, they have their own problems, and these problems must be addressed, because otherwise we might end up, okay, so let's say maybe at this election something happens and we don't end up with a far-right candidate on top. But if these people continue to feel like this, and they continue to feel that the election was stolen and that their opinions don't matter, in 4 years, we might end up with a parliament that is formed out of a majority of far-right members, and with a president that is fully far-right. So something needs to be addressed here. There's also a huge polarization of the society. So we've realized now more than ever that we actually live in bubbles. When personally, I am someone who is interested in politics. I read the news, I follow everything that's happening, and I missed this completely. And I was not the only one. All the leaders of the Romanian institutions, they all missed this. How is this possible? We have to look a bit back and see if, who are these people and why are we not talking to them anymore? And why is this division so high between us? There's also the global reaction. Because on the first hand, you had the previous administration sending the message that this was Russian interference, make sure that you have fair elections, and make sure that you don't switch from this transatlantic path. Now, the current administration is a bit more critical, but on the other side. So we had the Vice President of the United States commenting on how strong the democracy in Romania is, and saying that we do not share the same values. and that this cancellation of the election was not fair. We have Elon Musk criticizing the annulment of the elections and the fact that Călin Georgescu was not allowed to run anymore. He calls it anti-democratic. Then we have Russia's spokesperson, who also called the cancellation of the election illegitimate and says that the next elections are the result of the next election should not be approved by the international committee without Călin Georgescu running. So somehow this is the direction that we've seen from the United States and from Russia. And then you have all the European leaders that say this was right, this was the right thing to do. We are all trying to fight these hybrid attacks that are coming from Russia. It's very complicated when it comes to cybersecurity and when it comes to disinformation spreading on social media. So I'm not sure what's going to happen. I think that, or I hope, I try to be optimistic about it. I hope that this time we are not going to end up with a far-right candidate on top. I hope so. But again, this doesn't really mean anything if in 4 years we're going to come back to the same problem, because this is not something that we can keep on doing. Canceling elections is never a good idea. We already set a precedent that is unheard of in Europe, at least. And we are already in the headlines of all the international media, and not for the good reasons. So somehow they really managed to put Romania on the map, and everything that comes out of that is bad. It's a bad image. Okay, so should we move on to questions you might have?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much for explaining this in such a simple way, because this is such a complex subject to discuss. I only have a couple of follow-up questions about, you mentioned Russian influence, and really is very interesting how candidates who have this reactionary politics and reactive to the current system, anti-system politicians usually gain this wave of support in the nations. But you mentioned illiterate people in the rural areas also mostly were voters of a new candidate, which is new to me because from my knowledge, these illiterate people usually still go for status quo, and they always choose for the political systems to stay the way they are. And it is just something that this reactionary politics is something that post-totalitarian nations are all used to. But my question here is, how deep does the Russian influence, the allegations of it, actually go? What's your take on this? And what was the role of the narratives around these elections and these anti-system, and of course after the elections were canceled, the narratives of stolen elections on social media? What was the role of this disinformation, first of all, in kind of changing the vector of this rural population and making them actually vote for the new candidate, and then into the whole nation, how it divided people, basically? That would be my question.
So I think there are more aspects here that need to be considered. So when it comes to this Russian influence, the problem that many people have stated is that it's very difficult to show. You know, it's not easy to find a hard proof that this was okay. So there was money coming from Russia for these elections. But there were issues. So first of all, again, you have a candidate that says zero campaign funding. Now, for any of us who know a bit about social media, you know that you cannot become viral at this level without money being pushed in from somewhere. They also found a lot of TikTok influencers in Romania who had been paid to campaign in favor of Călin Georgescu. most of them don't know who paid them. Okay, so there's this long line of people that now need to be interrogated, maybe, so you can directly link these to Russia. Then you have these cyber attacks that the Romanian intelligence community says they were coming from Russia. But again, it's not something that it's very easy to show black and white. Now, how did he manage to get such a big support? Because he got support, right? I mean, these people actually voted for him. It was not a stolen election in the traditional sense of how stolen elections used to happen in this part of the world. People actually voted for him because, first of all, he is charismatic. He shows up as this very intellectual person. Like he seems smart. He speaks very slowly. He has these very simple messages. He appeals to, the land and these values of the faith of the Romanian people, and things that people in the rural areas feel that the mainstream parties have forgotten. Because now the mainstream parties, both of them, the Social Democrats and the National Liberals, they're very different from what they were 20 years ago. They're, in a sense, less populistic. They appeal less to the basic, to the average Romanian. They don't have that rhetoric anymore. They're kind of aligned, even though in theory they represent different ideologies. So he came and showed up on people's phone. Again, TikTok is super big in Romania everywhere. So like everybody in the countryside, wherever, gets their news from just like scrolling on TikTok. So you see this guy a lot, and I guess it becomes an alternative. He doesn't really offer anything much, but he speaks about how we will take our country back. Because, I don't know, someone has sold maybe our country, and we need to take it back. We need to get our sovereignty back, because this was the message. Sovereign Romania, taking our sovereignty back. Now, probably most of these people would not necessarily be able to define what sovereignty means, because Romania is a sovereign country. I mean, nobody is making us do anything. But he was appealing. He had these very good recorded speeches. He also appealed to more educated people. So it's not just a phenomenon of poor, uneducated people voting for them. No. After the election, we saw people working in Romanian corporations who also voted for him. And their explanation was that he's anti-system, which is, again, wrong, because this is a guy who's been working for different state institutions his entire life. I mean, he's not coming from nowhere. He's got a PhD in I don't remember exactly, agronomy, I think. He's been working on sustainable development for different ministries in Romania. He's been working for the United Nations. And somehow he portrayed himself as this anti-system candidate when he is actually a product of the system. But people didn't see this. People saw this guy coming out of nowhere, saying that he's not spending any money on the campaign. That helped a lot his image. People in Romania have this. They still have this communist legacy of not liking. The big guys, the elites, the people who they have the means to spend the big parties. This is a small guy. He's not backed by any party. He just tries to be here for his country and run and help us. So they stood with the victim in a way, like this anti-system guy. He's gonna come. He's not financed by anyone, so there are no stakes for him in this. He just wants to do good. And this narrative was appreciated. Again, combined with the fact that many people didn't want to vote with the traditional parties anymore because of this coalition that they've made together. They said, okay, this guy is an alternative. Let's vote for him. That's kind of my take on this.
Thank you so much for answering the question. It really is such an interesting topic, first of all, because from what I'm seeing, the citizens are still divided about whether the upcoming election, some are more excited, some are less excited about it. But I'm keeping fingers crossed for May 4th and 18th for you guys. I just wanted to turn to audience right now if we have any questions from our listeners. We have some time to answer them.
I'm just going to add something, and maybe we get some questions during this time. So, a lot of us here had this moral dilemma before the Electoral Bureau rejected his file. We were like, okay, so what do you think is going to happen? Should the Romanian state let this guy run? Because it seems kind of logical that it's better to let him run and let him lose as well, because that's going to give legitimacy to the process. That's going to show Romanian voters that the vote was not stolen, that okay, he's allowed to run. We're going to monitor a bit better what's happening on social media and so on. And okay, if he wins, he wins, and if he loses, he loses, and that's it. And if he loses, then people would not feel betrayed anymore, and we could just go on and try to build better frameworks for the next elections. But then you have other people saying, yeah, but this guy got here into following something that's unfair and maybe illegal. He's not necessarily upholding the constitution of Romania, which is something that you are required to do if you're a president. He is displaying these sympathies towards the fascist background of Romania, which again is illegal. So can you put a person that is not law-abiding in top of a country? And if he got there by being supported by a foreign agent, does that still make him a good candidate for this country, or are we just gonna lose our country to Russia just because we were afraid to do this and to bar him from running? So it's a moral dilemma in a way.
Yes, I understand that fully, because the move was definitely something that sparked a question whether it is a political move and a means of political suppression. I don't think we have any questions from the audience yet, but I do have some questions.
Okay.
First of all, I wanted to touch more about the actual candidates, and you mentioned them about with Georgescu out, Romania is left with a field of candidates. And I wanted to ask you, what are some of the moves that Romania is right now taking, citizens as well as the court and the government, to avoid these kinds of situations again? How are you guys avoiding the same situation, and how is basically a pathway of restoring stability envisioned right now in Romania?
Well, so first of all, the Romanian authorities went after TikTok. That was the main problem that they saw in this, because on the other social media platforms, all candidates have to put a label when it's about political advertisement. To know that is political advertisement, which did not happen on TikTok. So they forced TikTok to be a lot more careful with the political advertising that it's doing, and also to report on money that was spent on political advertising. Now, the other candidates, I think they're all pretty well known. So George Simeon, who is the far right candidate, he leans towards a more mainstream candidate, in the sense that he's been on TV a lot of times. Now he's giving interviews to all these American influencers as well. He's been trying to have a very active stance on all the social media platforms. The problem is that I don't think he will be as appealing as Călin Georgescu to the voters. So he will, of course, gather a lot of the votes that previously went for Călin Georgescu, but not all of them, because he is not seen as charismatic, and also he is backed by a party which not a lot of people like. So he's more of a mainstream political figure for a lot of Romanians. Other than this, with the other candidates, I think everybody's trying to be a lot more careful with the money that they're putting in political advertising. Of course, now don't imagine that on TikTok he was the only one who was advertising, because all the other candidates were there as well. But there was something happening. I don't know. Maybe it was the algorithm. Maybe it was something else. Maybe it was just like a lot of money being pushed towards political advertising. But there were so many viral clips and so many accounts promoting Călin Georgescu that it felt a bit strange. Most of us, who I personally don't use TikTok, but after the elections, I just like downloaded the app just to see what's in the feed. And there were so many videos. I mean, it was impossible. Out of 10 videos, 4 of them were about Călin Georgescu. So I don't know, maybe this is the fault of how algorithms on social media work, but something had happened there. Now, there is also a big question here about what lessons could be drawn from this. Because when you do have a part of the population that is vulnerable to disinformation and to propaganda, and you have these online tools that are now being used to promote certain points of view, you have to wonder if there is something that institutions and countries can do to better protect their institutional frameworks, because they do affect them very, very much. And it's not something that we truly know how to handle. You know, in an ideal world, this shouldn't matter, right? I mean, it should be, every candidate should be right to do as much political advertising as they want. But then again, is it fair when people don't actually understand who they're voting for? Is it fair when people don't understand that some of the claims that these candidates are making are false? I don't know. It's a very complicated question to answer here.
It indeed is, especially as you mentioned, this is not a traditional case of stolen elections. This is not ballot stuffing or somebody not counting the votes, right? It's something that happens basically 2 days before the elections. You already know whether the elections are won or not. It's just shaping the public narrative. Whenever people go, they usually already have a certain candidate in mind that they are going to vote for, and it's usually very hard for them to change the opinion.
What about the polls? You know, we had dozens of polls before the elections, and none of them showed this guy at more than 4%. So maybe there's also a wrong way in which we are conducting these polls. So that should also be analyzed in a way.
Definitely. And also who is doing the polls is definitely a very big issue, and who is ordering them. I know where I am, it's extremely polarized. These polls, whoever orders it is usually either government affiliated or opposition affiliated, and they lean in favor of like the certain groups, interest groups that order them. But we do have one question from the audience, from Pedro. Pedro, you can go ahead and ask the question.
All right, so sorry from the noise. I'm not at home, okay? But I want to begin say that like it's clear that those nationalist parties are an all-time high, not only in Romania but like in Europe as a whole, and that much of his support comes from a coalition being made between the more centrist parties. So wouldn't the solution come from a more obvious rift between those parties, uh, giving a lot less attention by the traditional media to the extremist parties and simply not interfering in the elections? Like in this way, if he wins, he wins. If not, whatever. And it will bring a lot more legitimacy to the Romanian institutions. That's my question.
Okay, so just to make sure I understood. So your idea is that the role of the traditional media in promoting some of the candidates, is that what you want me to?
Like the alarmism they sometimes do. I see that a lot in my country in Portugal, that they say that some parties extremists and that they are like far right and sometimes even compare them with Nazi Germany and that we shouldn't vote for that. I will say that we should avoid that kind of attention because that will simply motivate some people to vote for them.
Okay, yeah. So I see your point. Now, I agree with you in the sense that we are alienating people when we call them like that. When we say, okay, if you voted for this guy, you're an extremist, you're a Nazi, you're a fascist, you're a you name it. That's definitely not helping. But then I'm not sure if you can not have traditional media getting into this. I mean, that's how they make money. You know, that's they with the big headlines and the shocking news and calling people names. That's how they become more visible and more. Popular in the country. Now, a problem, and I'm happy you mentioned this because the traditional media actually also uh, didn't consider this guy at all. So he was never on TV in Romania before the elections. Never. Uh, they also didn't know about him at all. He was not invited anywhere. After the elections, he refused actually to go to most TV stations. And this was also surprising for us because TV is still extremely big in Romania. And seeing political candidates on TV, having them invited into different talk shows and so on, is part of what we thought was political advertising. It seems now that you can actually bypass that completely and that it doesn't necessarily matter that much. Um, a lot of Romanians also placed blame on traditional media for not having this guy invited because they did invite most of the candidates, but he was somehow left behind. I don't know, maybe because they thought he didn't have any chances at actually winning. Maybe there was something else, but definitely he was not popular in the media at all. And now, of course, in Romania, we are not scoring very high on freedom of the press. We still have media that is owned by or that is financed through political parties. And of course, that means that these media outlets are going to promote a certain narrative. So I'm not sure how would we be able to not have the media interfere with that anymore. I don't know. Does this answer your question, or maybe do you want me to develop on
Yeah,
some?
I think it kind of does.
Thank you, Pedro, so much for your question. And thank you, Diana, for walking us through the situation in Romania. As I said, I'm keeping fingers crossed. We are going to see the developments. And thank you to everybody who attended and listened to the webinar. Thank you for our online listeners also. Diana, if you have any last words for us.
Thank you for having me here. I know it's not an easy situation to understand, and it's also there's really no clear answer to any of the questions that we are trying to go through, because it is complex. Canceling elections is definitely not good. It's a bad sign for democracies, especially for a European state. But in this situation, um, I don't know, maybe we should consider the fact that something had happened that was not a part of the framework that we were used to. So it was different. It definitely is a wake-up call for all liberal democracies. This should definitely not become a precedent. We do not want to see elections being cancelled in other countries, and we do not see elections. We do not want to see elections being cancelled in Romania either. Um, of course, personally, I hope we will manage to stay on this Euro-Atlantic path. I think this is what helped Romania go from a post-communist country in transition to a pretty prosperous country nowadays. I'm sorry that not all Romanians feel like this, because I think we've grown a lot in the past years, and I think being part of these institutions is what kept us in the clear. I mean, we are neighboring Ukraine here, and we don't have to wake up in the morning and wonder if Russia is going to invade us, because we are part of NATO, and that Russia is never going to do that to a NATO member. So I think there are many benefits in that a lot of Romanians are not necessarily perceiving as such. I hope I managed to shed a bit of light on what's happening. And I don't know, let's see how this thing unfolds in May.
Thank you. Thank you so much. For everybody that's listening, also thank you for joining again. This is a very interesting topic, and please stay tuned for our next episode of Fearless for Freedom. We're going to be announcing it shortly. And for everybody that is interested in talking about rising far-right and authoritarian regimes in Europe, you should definitely attend LibertyCon Europe. That is happening in Prague, April 26th and 27th. These are some of the topics that we're going to be tackling. Thank you again, and a good day, everyone.